Okay, so let's keep going through a lot of these examples of looking at different depositional elements in seismic attributes. And so now we're going to be moving more into carbonate systems, and I'm going to show you a few case studies of carbonate features in seismic. So of course, we start off with looking at our analogs. So here's kind of a nice summary of some of the main types of carbonate platforms from Burgess, from having, uh, you know, uh, distally steepening platforms to some of those that are more flat topped with attached platforms. You could see more clearly where the platform ends and some of the sediments that are deposited down below it, and then some isolated platforms where you may see some reefs. The areas where you may see reefs are kind of highlighted in purple. And yeah, so let's move on. Mostly what I'm going to be showing images of are some of these reefs and patch reefs. And so looking at the rim to shelf platforms, this is kind of very generalized, again, shelf to basin profile, where you can see the barrier reef protects the interior lagoon, and we can have a lot of these middle shelf patch reefs that form in it. When you have more of the rim shelf with the accretionary slope apron, you can also see where we'll get some of the pinnacle reefs and the shelf edge reefs form. There's a lot of different expressions of reefs because there's a lot of variability of it, and I didn't give it justice in my 30-second kind of figures that I showed before. But what I'm trying to show here is the many ways that you can have your seismic expression of your reef in 3D migrated data. And so you can have on this top left reefs that have more of a mounding shape. Here we have porous reefs that often have more of a reflection void where the reef is. Let's see, next we move to where we have reef edges that often create diffractions that end up being observed on unmigrated data. On those migrated data, you end up without the refractions, but rather you see like an abrupt termination along the reef's flanks. Here, you can have reflection patterns that differ on different sides of a reef. So one side is often kind of moving more into the basinal environment, while the other side is on the shelf. You could have, in that case, areas where the reefs, where the layers compact differentially kind of drape over the top of the reef. Shown here. Here we've got reflectors below a reef, where we're kind of noticing in this case that they show that pull up in the seismic time section. So that means these sub-reef reflectors appear to be higher than those around it. If you have very porous carbonates and they're surrounded by higher velocity rocks like anhydrates, you can often, but not often, you can occasionally or rarely, if you happen to have these, they would exhibit kind of that velocity push down or a delay in the time section. And then since reefs often occur on a hinge line or the shelf edge, you might see them also grow on kind of like the edges of faults. So you may see faults below them. So there's a lot of different expressions that you can end up with. And in all of them, you'll end up with some differential compaction, and you'll want to pay attention to which direction you have the shelf edge, or any anomalous features that you don't want to misinterpret as structure. Okay, so here we're now looking at some seismic data of a pinnacle reef in Alberta, Canada region, where we're looking at a time slice through the coherence volume, and then also the vertical seismic through, from A to A prime through the seismic volume. And so you can pick out a lot of features just with the coherence, from the main body of the reef right in here to the extent of the reef colony. So you can kind of see where it ends up, and you can see how it kind of terminates in the seismic data also down here. And you can even see some kind of distinction of the outer lagoonal area. And so with carbonates, I'm not an expert in carbonates. I've worked more with clastic systems. But one of the things you want to keep in mind is this is where knowing your analog system really well can really help improve your interpretation. So here's that same area of the Pinnacle Reef. And now we're looking at coherent slices at 20 millisecond increments, so moving down through it. And in this case, the coherence slices are kind of being displayed in a different, they are being displayed in a different color scale, which you can see can help enhance some of the features that you may be interested in. So instead of using the standard kind of grayscale that we're showing here in the middle, they've switched to a rainbow color scale, which really highlights the edges of the rim much better. I think that brighter red color. So don't be scared to change around your color scale to help you yourself see the patterns that you need to see. Here we're still looking at reefs in the Zama Basin. What we've got here is a slice through the seismic data, so just showing you what it looks like before we run coherence, and then images of the reef at different depths moving through that data. And so you can see the clear difference in the seismic amplitude data versus the coherence data, and why you would want to run coherence for looking at Pinnacle Reefs. Here's some more recent seismic data, so higher resolution data in Indonesia looking at some Miocene reefs. And so this is a buildup. And you can see the vertical section through the seismic amplitude data here. And then this time slice we're looking at is at 200 milliseconds, so fairly shallow. We've got it lit up here with a co-render of coherence, and then the dip azimuth and the dip magnitude. So how much is it dipping? What direction is it dipping? And it really brings out the structure of this reef. We can look at the same reef using our shape indices. So I've mentioned these before. They're a function of curvature. So in this case, we're co-rendering the shape index, curvedness, and coherence. So coherence is great to have as that edge detector. And then the level of curvedness, as well as the shape index, where kind of our domes will be redder in color, our bowls in the more purplish color, and then you've got ridges in yellow. And so you're really seeing a lot more texture of this reef system. And then looking at it again, now moving a little bit deeper. So we're a little bit deeper now, and you could see kind of the bowl and dome shape of the buildup of the smaller reefs. And then here's another example. So now we've moved even further down. So we're down at this line at like 550 milliseconds or so. Instead of looking at the the geometric attributes, now we've got peak spectral frequency, peak spectral magnitude, and coherence. So we're always keeping that coherence in there as the edge detector, but now we're also adding in frequency attributes. And so we can see areas where we have higher frequency, lower frequency, and again, these really highlight a lot of the variation along within this reef. And then moving back up a little bit higher where we were before, again with the peak spectral frequency and peak spectral magnitude and coherence, you can see areas where you have the higher frequencies, the lower frequencies, and those kind of individual reefs that conglomerated together. And then back here up at the top. So a lot of interesting detail that you could bring out, whether you're looking at the shape indices or, so the geometric attributes or the frequency attributes. And then this is another image of that same reef. So at 200 milliseconds, in this case, it's a co-rendering of the reflector convergence azimuth, the reflector convergence magnitude. So, and then coherence again. And you can see how you could pick up a lot of variation. Really, I don't know. I feel like this image, it almost looks like it's in 3D, but you're really picking up a lot of detail. And then moving over a little bit more, so up here, again, we can see it. We can see where the reflectors converge in the direction to the west, the direction to the east. So you're picking up some of that internal structure in the vertical section now. And then moving down a little bit, down a line a little bit, we can again, use the reflector convergence and the reflector magnitude to pick out more of the internal structure. And then down towards the base of it, and then doing a cross line. So you can see how combining all of these together really gives you a good evaluation, a good interpretation of many of the aspects of this reef, to how much it varies, and the different structures within it. Okay, so let's look at a pinnacle reef example. So here we're going to be looking at some data in the Horseshoe Atoll area. And so just as a reminder, when these, as kind of an analog for the formation of the Horseshoe Atoll, what usually happens first is you've got your fringing reef that forms, and then it starts growing in the shallow waters. And then over time, the island subsides and the reef grows outward, and then the distance between land and the reef increases. And so this creates that fringing reef that develops into a barrier reef. And so you could kind of see that in this red circled area of the seismic data. And then if the island completely subsides, all that's left is the reef, and it retains kind of the same shape of the island that it grew around and forms a ring that then encloses a lagoon. Okay, and so all of that you could pick out if you go through in a very detailed fashion the coherence of your seismic data. A lot of times we may look at coherence that looks like this and think that it looks fairly noisy, but if you kind of think about the development and the seismic resolution of what you're going to be able to see, you can start giving meaning to a lot of these kind of squiggles that can look a little bit messy, but actually have geologic meaning to them. And so here we're looking at the seismic data, vertical section, the seismic amplitude data for this area of the Horseshoe Atoll. And so we're going to be looking at this pinnacle reef over here. And so here we've got it in coherence, where it's clearly illuminating some of the larger reefs. And then I'm going to animate through a couple of time slices moving down in the coherence volume. No, moving up, sorry. Okay, so you can see the pinnacle reef. And let me go back. Hold on. Okay, so now we're moving down through time. So we're going from the top down. I have to fix my notes for this, which is why I practice these lectures and record them for you. So we're at Pinnacle Reef, we're kind of at the base of it, and then as time elapses and we move up, you can kind of see the formation of that Pinnacle Reef and how it peters out. And then we can look at it, the coherence with the seismic amplitude and vertical section. So we've got our Pinnacle Reef right there. We could see the mounding, and we could take our seismic attributes of the ridge and dome shape, so our shape indices, and we can co-render them with the coherence slice. We can create geobodies out of them by rendering them transparent. So you kind of set the color scale to be transparent, except for where you have these ridges and domes that you're interested in. And then you can look at it on the entire coherence slice, which is a really valuable tool, particularly with pinnacle reefs, because you have a lot of them separated from each other, but in the same region. If you want to, you can pick them all as multiple geobodies, again, depending on what software you're using. So in this case, you could set a threshold of voxels, and then it converts each feature into its own geobody. And so the ones that aren't connected end up as different colors in this software package. And so just that one reef that we were focusing on was one that was producing over 100 barrels of oil a day. Okay, let's look at some carbonate rims in seismic data. And so here we're looking at a carbonate rim in the Sarawak seismic data set. So we've got it displayed up here with spectral components. So we've got low frequency, 5, 20, and then 50 hertz data being blended together. We've also got here the amplitude data, and then just some images of the amplitude data with seismic vertical section next to it, as well as some information from the wells, which show kind of like the dolomite limestone interval, so on a microscopic level, which I think is kind of neat to see. But again, you could just see how using a couple of seismic attributes allows us to really differentiate what we're seeing in the amplitude data, the seismic amplitude data. So it brings out more details. And then here's using a similar geobody example where the authors have picked out the rim area and the rim geobodies and then plotted them next to the volume attributes on the seismic data. So you can clearly see where the rims are building up. And then here's another case of a pinnacle reef. In this case, so this is onshore data in the Michigan Basin, an area that's used for gas storage. And we have a lot of well data in this seismic data set. So one of my students had created a P impedance seismic volume generated from a seismic pre-stack inversion, and then compared the well data to it in order to interpret exactly what the different facies were. And there were also other attributes that went into this analysis by Clayton Silver, and we had some anhydrite salt that kind of got in the way, and we had to image too. But just another attribute technique that you can use for reefs. And there are, of course, some pitfalls and limitations. So, of course, one of the ones that I've already alluded to in a previous slide are velocity issues. So you could have velocity pull-up, and this is a case of that in Australia, where we're looking at some curvature here. And in a time slice, you can see our reef, very beautiful reef, in the Browse Basin. So it's a little bit higher in the seismic data, but because of that velocity pull-up, we're actually seeing an artifact of the reef below it. And so in this one, I think shows it really clearly, because you can see the reef in seismic, and then you can see the artifact that it's causing below it. So those are things you want to keep an eye out for. And that's why when you're doing QC of data, you want to make sure you're not just looking at your area of interest, but you're aware of what's going on shallow, since that may affect your seismic data. Here's another case where we've got velocity pull-up in Indonesia. So, of course, you can work around this by working in depth migrated data instead of time migrated data. And so you'll notice in the time migrated example here, we have that velocity pull-up, but we don't have it in the depth migrated data. And so just a few key concepts. Of course, this was like a quick sampler of showing some reef features, particularly carbonate reefs. But you want to be aware of the wide variety of seismic expression the reefs can have. I did show you that example from Indonesia, where if you have really good data, you can actually see a lot of the internal structure using different seismic attributes. And so in that case, I used frequency attributes, or I didn't use it, but I showed frequency attributes, and also shape indices. So curvature and geometric related attributes were really good at showing the internal architecture. With reefs, you can do a lot of the geobody picking, using the shape indices to really delineate where the features are. And we saw that also with the carbonate rim example of using geobodies. And one of the things that you want to be aware of is that carbonate reefs can look a lot like volcanic buildups. So it's really good to have an idea of other patterns that you're seeing in the seismic data. So I showed you that example from a couple of lectures ago, where we had what looked like pinnacle reefs, but we were able to see a sill in the data that gave us a little bit more context that perhaps we were looking more at volcanic features rather than pinnacle reefs. So just always be aware and collect as much information as you can about your basin and about what types of formations you would expect, so that you can accurately, as accurately as possible, interpret the data, and since a lot of geologic features look similar to each other, particularly carbonate reefs and volcanics. As always, thanks for listening.